Here we go. Okay, thank you. So basically, in the past 10 minutes, I said thank you to everybody. Trust me on this, and don't be mad at me if I go on.
And so I'm taking
now the most very important thing people to thank. So in addition to Professor Fiorentino and Marietta Signori, I wanted to thank the administrative staff of our department because their work is the least visible and perhaps, I won't say the most necessary, but surely it's necessary enough. So Dr. Corallo, Dr. Guido, Dr. De Lorenzo, Dr. Manti, and I beg forgiveness in advance if I forgot anyone, but all these people are proven absolutely necessary in organizing this seminar. So, thank you. Thank you to our colleagues who have agreed on being here and traveling from the United States, from France, from different parts of Italy in order to be here with us and the participants as well. And I hope they will be disappointed and hope that they will find this seminar useful for their research and for a better understanding, a deeper understanding of the ancient world, with reference to voice in particular. Just practical remarks. Some of you have asked for a certificate of attendance, which can be used, with their employers or as a proof of professional updating and so on. If you need a certificate of attendance, on that circular bench where the column is, there are signature sheets where you can write down your name, surname, and your signature, and these are divided by day and by morning and afternoon sessions. So at the end of the seminar, we will be counting how many hours you attended, and we will issue a certificate accordingly. So please feel free to sign those sheets if you are in need of any form of certification. So now, if I'm not forgetting anything, let's get down to the business. Because we, as Daniela said earlier, we have chosen the I don't mean just people specializing in antiquity, but different kind of scholars from different fields. It has been addressed by musicologists, historians of vocal techniques, which is a very promising field of musicology, and psychologists as well, because our voice is the most immediate projection of ourselves towards the external space, towards the others. Voice is something that moves and carries a part of ourselves all the way to someone else's perception, to someone else's ears. We may think of voice as some kind of bridge that is meant to compensate for the isolation and the impossibility to reach others, to which we would be condemned if voice did not exist. On the other hand, voice is also a means of camouflage. It's through voice that we can pretend to be someone else, someone we're not. This happens when we imitate another person or an animal or noise from the environment, and of course this happens in theater. The expression singing into the mask not only indicates a particular sensation or feeling that in some musical styles the singer is supposed or expected to experience when singing. Singing into the mask is common in operatic singing, for example. But singing into the mask is also an effective image of this unique mixture of naturality and artificiality when it comes to voice. By artificiality, I mean, of course, the social and cultural significance of voice. In these days, we will be discussing the human voice as a means for making music, basically, but not only. Also for coping with the dynamics of war and the highly competitive world of politics. In the ancient world, the power of political persuasion, it's unthinkable without the importance of the voice as a physical object, as a physical means of persuasion. We will see how physicians treated voice from a medical standpoint, and we will also venture in the Renaissance revival of Greek music and how theorists in the Italian Cinquecento looked at ancient Greek singing with an eye to the singing art of their times. So, in this respect, we are paying homage to the second part of the name of our association, its cultural heritage. Here is the cultural heritage. Finally, we will also have the distinction of listening to performances and performers specializing in ancient Greek music. I'm referring to the concert on the evening on the 2nd of July, both according to ancient techniques and with replicas of ancient instruments, and in a completely different version as well, thanks to our students, the musicians of the so-called GEMS wrestling band, and Raffaella Bride, a very well-known singer here in Salento and Lecce. And since we are lucky enough to have this wonderful group of musicians in our department, it seems a good idea to just to give them a couple of pieces of ancient Greek music transcribed to modern notation in the very well-known edition of Egert Bellman and Martin West, and just to see what they could make of them. How modern musicians, they are mostly used to musical improvisation. They play jazz, they play the modern kind of popular music. And the basic idea of this concert, which we experienced even last year with different pieces of music, of course, was to put ancient music and modern musicians in dialogue and see what comes out of this interaction. And we consider this a very important part of the seminar, and this concept will involve voice, because we will have we will have two musicians who will sing ancient Greek, and a singer who will sing ancient Greek with the modern approach. So these few words were in order like this to give you an idea of what we'll be doing these days. But now maybe we can yes, we can proceed in our schedule and give the floor to our first speaker. I have the distinction to introduce Professor Sylvain Perrault, whom I asked to join me here at the table. And he is, by the way, in the shared folder to which you all have access. I mean, all the people who filled the form and whose emails we had received a link to a shared folder. In that folder, you find the CVs and the handout of all the speakers. But I think it's necessary to introduce our speakers nonetheless. So, Sylvain Perrault is a former scientific member of the French School of Archaeology at Athens, and now a junior food researcher at the CNRS, as well as director of the research unit UMR 1744 at Metne, Strasbourg, and he devotes his research to ancient Greek music and soundscapes and to their reception in medieval and modern times. He wrote his PhD on music and musicians in their field integrity in a publication which will see the light of day shortly, I guess. And yes, and with he initiated a research program in ancient soundscapes, the sonic landscape of antiquity, methodology, historiography, and perspectives, and from cacophony to music, the perception of sound in ancient societies to 2022, and a part of which was the exhibition Musique Echo de l'Antiquité, the catalog published in 2016, and now database of remains of sound artifacts in the ancient Mediterranean world, Project Remand. He is also involved in the field of reception studies with Agnosco and Corbier and Greek musics in representation in 19th and 20th centuries. So, please, Sylvain, you have the floor. Off you go. Thank you.
Mille per la presentazione. Vorrei ringraziare gli organizzatori, la professoressa Daniela Castello e il professore Massimo Raffa per l'invio. Per me la terza volta a Lecce, così sempre per piacere. Ma torno all'inglese per la relazione. And just, I have no handout actually, so you don't have to go to the folder online. Everything will be on the screen. And I have to apologize for Daniela and Angela because we'll listen to some things you have, you may have listened to a few days ago, but not everything. In a passage from the Phaedrus, Socrates tells Phaedrus the myth that the god Zeus invented writing with the idea of making a pharmacon for human beings. This is how he presents it to the king Thamus, emphasizing that it is a remedy pharmacon intended to compensate for the defects of memory. Samus, who plays on the double meaning grief of pharmacon, both remedy and poison, we thought that this invention is not so beneficial because it pushes men to rely on a subterfuge and to neglect their capacity to remember. This passage gave rise to a famous commentary on the entire dialogue by Jacques Derrida, La Pharmacie de Platon, where he highlights in particular the fact that the remedy or poison duality is coupled with an opposition of opposites, reality and appearance. Is writing a real benefit for men, or does it only have the preparations? This suspicion cast in writing and serves as a starting point for Eric Havelock's theory that in the 4th century Greek culture shifted from an oral culture to a written culture, with Plato acting as a whistleblower. Among the uses of writing in musical notation, which seems to have become established in the form we know it in the time of Plato and Aristotle, although it is not possible to precipitate this phenomenon. According to Havelock, taken in particular by Tim Gold, his lines, the Greeks never managed to invent an effective system of notation, which nevertheless lasted at least 9 centuries, because it did not write down everything. By reading again Plato's text, we can take the problem in reverse and open up new perspectives. Was it not, on the contrary, deliberate not to write everything down, when we consider that the Greeks deemed it necessary to invent a vocal notation for singing distinct from instrumental notation? But my point is that Plato says. An expression of Plato, I believe, has escaped most commentators. The philosophers certainly deplore the reliance on writing to the detriment of memory, but nevertheless indicates that human beings entrust certain things to writing. That is to say, they make a choice between what should be noted and what should not. This invention will produce forgetfulness of the sounds of those who learn it, by making them neglect memory, because due to the trust placed in writing, they will carry out the process of remembering from the outside based on characters that are foreign to them, and not from the inside. You have therefore not found the preparation for memory. This confidence in writing can be interpreted in at least 2 ways. We note down what we judge worthy of being noted, but also we note down certain things so that others remain at the discretion of the performer. The notation used by the Greeks perhaps has the function of, I would say, saving performances, like Kant said, you have to save the phenomena. And in this, writing had in no way condemned the oral tradition, but it obeyed other issues, notably that of a patrimonialization of the elements considered as fundamental, capable of characterizing the musical style of the composer. In other words, notation did not put an end to improvised and spontaneous singing practices, or at least intended for a single performance. It rather allowed the preservation of melodies for which a very particular use was intended. Now this time it has tested the phenomenon consisting, alongside contemporary production, of taking up ancient words, in particular those which are typical of what the moderns have called new music or theatrical music, as evidenced in the inscriptions. This text provides valuable insights into what is being sung in Hellenistic times, but also in the context and the number of musicians, so that we can question the balance between songs and instruments. See, my point today is to look at all the Hellenistic inscriptions mentioned, not all, but most of them, to see where the balance is between the voice and the instrument. And because following Havelock, there is and also somehow the works of Claude Calame, but in another perspective. The archaic and classical Greece was considered as a song culture, and Hellenistic Greece would not be a song culture. My point is to prove that it's false. It's also a song culture, but with new abilities. So, after considering the main impacts that this aesthetic of new music had on the relationship between song and instrument, I will try to show you to what extent stage competitions reflect these fashions, and whether political and social changes in musical life contributed to defining new modalities of song in the Hellenistic period. So first, singing in the Hellenistic period, an aesthetic is the tradition of new music. Hellenistic inscriptions bear witness to a praise for the works of composers who participated in the last third of the 5th century BC in this musical revolution characterized by modern as the new music. Terminology that is, however, not ancient, apart from one excerpt from the dialogue on music attributed to Plutarch, where the word uses kainotomia, so modernity, novelty, innovation. In other words, there was already a question about the place of musical innovations in the representation what we have of the history of Greek music between processes that are continuous, always in progress, and remarkable moments of rupture, of break. Aristophanes and Pherecrates, Plato, for example, deplore them, concentrating their criticisms around several figures: Euripides, Agathon, Kinesias, Timothy of Miletus, or Philoxenus of Cicero. These artists were described as modern, which was not bad, not good in Aristophanes' eyes, like here, in the wasps. Nevertheless, I say to him, then recite at least one passage from any of these modern poets, Neo-Heroi, any of these well-turned pieces. And he immediately declared the passage from Euripides where brother fell over Zeus Satyrs, his own sister born of the same mondi. Aristophanes' attacks were not enough, however, to affect Euripides' popularity, which quickly spread outside Attica and continued throughout the Hellenistic period. According to Plutarch, Athenians sentenced to the Latomia in Syracuse owed their survival to the fact that they knew his melody by heart. Some even owed their salvation to Euripides, for of all the Greeks aboard, the Sicilians were apparently those who were most passionate about the use of his poem. Whenever newcomers brought them small samples and foretastes of his work, they learned these pieces by heart and joyfully communicated them to one another. At a banquet held at the time of Lysander, a Phocidian sang the beginning of the parodos of his Electra. But later, the chieftains had gathered for a banquet. The Phocidian sang, while they were drinking, the parodos from Euripides' Electra, which begins as follows: daughter of Agamemnon, Electra, hear my the rustic farmer. And you should note that Phocidian, for the Greeks at that time, it means that it's really a former, someone who doesn't know anything about literature. This popularity continued into the 4th century thanks to the ancient tragedy competition that were organized as part of the Dionysian. You see here this so-called inscription Didascalia, which record performances of here ancient tragedy in the year of 341-340. 3 times you have an ancient tragedy of Euripides, the Iphigenia, and the Orestes. And notice by now that these are 2 works from which we have excerpts from papyrus with the music notation. The same is true for Timotheus of Miletus, whose Ditheron Elpenor was sung and accompanied on the aulos in 320-319, judging by the Choragic monument of Lysias, whose inscription is preserved now. So this is the foundation of the monument, so this is not very marvelous. But the inscription, fortunately, has been saved, is now in the gate Velay, at the entrance of the Acropolis. Just take some good camera to see the inscription. It's very far from the entrance of the Acropolis, and no way to access this without material, specific material. But anyhow, the inscription has been read, and we can also translate as such. Nicias, son of Nicodemus, then of Cyprete, dedicated this monument for the victory as a Corregos for the tribe Kikrodus. Vandalion of Sicyon played the aulos, while the song, Asma, was Timotheus Elpino. Name was Falcon. In the 3rd century, or 2nd century BC, Ptolemaic Egypt, scribes made 2 copies with their musical notation, one of the first testament of the Orestes, and the other of the Iphigenia and Mondi. This species with the Bacchae constitutes the last 3 pieces of Euripides. In 2005, during the London competition whose musical trials were held in the Theatre of Argos, the general Strategos Philopoimen made a triumphant entrance, while the Pythagoras Pylades of Megalopolis started singing the first verse of the Persians of Timotheus, which echoes the passage from Polybius, according to whom the Arcadians learned by heart the works of Timotheus and Philoxenus of Cythera. So this is the Plutarch's statement on Philopoimen. Then during the competition of Pythagoras, he went to the theatre with his young man, in soldier's clavicles and purple shoes, all in the best of Valentine age, showing great reverence for their leader and great wonder of sounds that came from their many beautiful struggles. And they had just their chance would have it that the Pythagoras Pylades began to sing the Persians of Timotheus, forging for Greece the famous Greek organ of freedom. As the pomp which surrounded this composition was matched at the same time with the clarity of the voice, on all sides of the theatre looks were directed towards Philopoimen, and hands clapped with jubilation, the Greeks linking the greatness of the past with their hopes of approaching the greatness of song of that time through their audacity. Pausanias both, as Pylades was a man from Megalopolis, the most famous Pythagoras among his contemporaries, and as he had won a Pythian victory, and as he then sounds the nomos of the Persian of Timotheus Pylades, and as he had begun his song, forging for Greece a famous great organ of freedom, the Greek nation turned its eyes towards Philopoimen and they made it known by her applause that it was to him that his song referred. And this is the theatre of arts. So in the first quarter of the 2nd century, there is a small series of inscriptions that point in the same direction. Indeed, the list of achievements of an actor from Tegea and the basis of the statue of the Aulospea Satyros of Samos, who performed an extract from Bacchae at Delphi as part of a recital following the competition, show the taste for revivals of Euripides. This is the basis of the statue of Satyros, and we can read, Satyros, son of Eumenes of Samos, to him the first and only one it happened to play the Aulos without competitors at the contest, and to be asked to give to the god and to the Greeks out of the Gemini contest at the sacrifice in the Pythian Stadium, a song, Asma, with chorus, Dionysus, and a tune for Kythera from Euripides' Bacchae. And in addition, 2 Cretan inscriptions from Knossos and Prianthos indicate that the Pythagoras Menecles of Theos performed excerpts from Timotheus of Miletus and Polybius of Selymbria, as well as tunes borrowed from the islands' ancient poets of Crete. So, since Herodotus, son of Menodotus, and Menecles, son of Dionysius, who were sent as ambassadors from Theians, Cretan cities, and spent most of their time in our city, not only showed the perfect behavior during their stay, but also Menecles gave several times a recital of Kythera made of works of Timotheus, Polybius, and our ancient poets, in a beautiful way appropriated to educated people. Such medleys are still testified by 2 inscriptions found at Delphi. One day, that's the inscription with from the actor of the Tegea, which we put before, sorry, but I come back to it later. And so the 2 inscriptions found in Delphi are first this one of 2 brothers coming from Aegaira in the north of Peloponnesus, who offered among the lyric pieces of the ancient poets excerpts which were suitable for the god and our city. This inscription is to be found of the statue of Philopoimen here in Delphi. Here, an Arcadian monument, and in front of it, the basis of the Strategos Philopoimen was erected, and on this basis, later, was added the inscription with this very nice graffiti of the lion. And the second inscription from two brothers coming from Phaneos in Arcadia, says that as Theodoros and Antiochus, sons of Theodoros, citizens of Phaneos, came to us in giving honor to the god, performances in which they showed their musical skills, which got a great success by performing pieces of ancient poets appropriate to the god in our city. As during the next day, they behaved and directed rehearsals for boys in a way worthy of themselves, their own motherland, and our city. If we bear in mind that Dionysius of Halicarnassus, I don't discuss and consider this text just to show the reference, but if we bear in mind that Dionysius of Halicarnassus explained how the powers of Orestes should be sung, in a way that is, of course, insufficient or to reconstruct it, we can measure the continuity of the oral and written transmission of the text and melodies of the composer of the new music. So, what are the main characteristics of this new music, which was sung in the Hellenistic period? So, what were the main innovations? Some of you already know it, but sorry, I recall them. The innovations were first melodic, through the introduction of the chromatic genre in tragedy, which gives more sinuous melodies based on consecutive semitones, which earn Agathon and Euripides from Aristophanes the reproach of having drawn their inspiration from melodies of Asian origin, chromatic scales having an Oriental character, but that's late comments from maybe the Byzantine writer Celos in his treatise on tragedy. None of the tragedians seem to have used the chromatic before Euripides. And here the archaic historian in harmony, which was in use at the time of Euripides. Euripides and Timotheus were thus accused of composing in the manner of ant path. This is a statement about the fact that these composers borrowed their tunes from Asia. So that's a famous passage in the Frogs of Aristophanes. But he writes everything: brothers, songs, melodies, drinking songs, carrion or tunes, and their funeral version of their dances will know right away. Bring me the little lyre, but no need a lyre for that. Where's she, the shell clapper? He used of Euripides. It's with you that these melodies are good to sing. This is in the Testimony for Mosaic, the passage on this ant path. I'm blind, for I don't see a man. Here I see Serene. Be quiet, he's getting ready to sing a song that's Agathon is about to appear on stage. The parent says, ants forming path will make us Atropos, or what will it matter to us? This new style is so based on melodies that are described as melismatic, that is to say, producing on the same syllable a series of vocalizations, which Aristophanes and Dionysius of Halicarnassus in his analysis of Eurystheus have well accounted for. So, for example, here the frogs, and you under the roofs, who in the corners make the figure tweeze, that's to say, hey, the West French of the room, careful from the sinking shadow that were faithful to the orders of our thing. Or on the that was another passage on this ant path story on ferret. On the rhythmic level, two major trends can be identified. Tragedy is a question of composing in small units that say that Euripides has a tendency to make iambic trimeters, heard by making words ending at the end of each iambic, thus isolating 3 units where Aeschylus composed his verses in 2 large units. This is the whole point of Euripides' famous apparently in the frog, he has lost his lekythos. As for the nomes and the ditheron, the two genres in which Timotheus distinguished himself, they are characterized by free verses, freeing themselves from traditional rhythmic setting. We therefore obtain more complex areas which require more concentration from the singers and more virtuosity, which goes against a certain ethic of music. Timotheus will thus be accused of raiding its muse and Euripides of composing in the 12th position of the courtesan theory. Here, this text in depth criticized by some of you who make songs prepared by the Dodecta technique, women of Syria. This point is confirmed by the third area of innovation, which is the inclusion of instrumental solos, which are all the more impressive as the range of instruments increase. Chronomos is credited at the end of the 5th century with the invention of a type of aulos, which allows 3 different scales to be played at the same time. This innovation, so this is the text of Pausanias related to this, and this can be compared to the wonderful finds which have been found in the 80s and more recently in the 2000, first decade of 2000, in Megara, where alloy from the 3rd century have been found with this wonderful metallic systems, which allow to perform more notes than the simple alloys. So this alloy may be actually the result of chronomos innovation. This is the reason why Euripides is supposed to have integrated polychordy into tragedy. So more notes, like the Emperor Mozart. There are too many notes. And to this, the fourth innovation, the integration of instruments other than those provided by tradition and their enhancement. If Sophocles was the first to introduce the kithara into tragedy to play the mythical figure of Samiras himself in the eponymous play, we know that Euripides followed this. Sorry, I forgot to translate it. But we know from the inscription of Satyros of Samos that the plays on the aulos a kitharisma composed by Euripides for the backend. So the instrumental solo written for the guitar. He also performed what is described as a song with chorus by the name of Dionysus, probably a ditheron, which leads me to the fourth point, which is the mixture of poetic musical genres. If tragedy was visibly more successful than comedy in the Hellenistic revivals, it was overall the confusion of certain genres that the purists reproached this composer's for, but the fact of no longer being able to differentiate between the nomos, the poetic musical composition mainly performed in centuries, and having a precise narrative program, rather a solo in the classical period, and the ditheron, the choral composition for Dionysus. Later, Aristophanes reproaches the music in vogue of his time for no longer marking these distinctions, and Plato, who is in the same opinion, had a comment which will be the fifth and last point of my reminder of the innovation of the music, an increasingly important recourse to the processes of mimesis. So here, quote Aristophanes' piece about the epulia, the small epics, the epopetes, I don't know if we can say it in English, in French it would be perfect, epopetes, small epics, actually, which he should not compose, of course, but is involving tragedy. So, in this famous passage of the Laws, Plato said that in the music of his time there is too much mimesis. The muses will never mix together voices of animals, humans, and instruments, nor assemble all kinds of sounds into a composition to express a single thing. Our human poets, on the other hand, weaving these elements together in every direction confusing them irrationally would deserve to be mocked by those who, at a first sight, have received the flower of enjoyment at their share. Indeed, they see all these elements confused, but still they separate in all direction rhythm and figures without melodic words, without accompaniment certain meta, and covers in melody and rhythm without words, played on the kithara of the others all by themselves. In this condition, it is very difficult to recognize in the rhythm and harmony devoid of words what they mean and what kind of imitation of any value there is. It is inevitable to think that such a practice is full of great rusticity, so much that they exceed volubility and animal cries to the point that they resort to playing the hours and the kithara outside of dancing and singing. It would be quite crude and charlatan to resort to each of these two instruments alone, which has a parallel in the so famous passage of the Republic, but considering here Plato considered not the musicians but the rhetoric, orators, or will they imitate the neighing of horses, the roaring of bulls, the roaring of rivers, the roaring of the sea, thunder, and all the land. And then you have the trumpets, all of the series, and so on. In short, even if singing is a little less present due to the more pronounced space for instrumental solos and their mimetic capacities, these innovations apply well to some performances, which we may prize as confirmed by the inscription. The list of prizes of this actor from Tegea, because the stone has been found in Tegea, so we think that was for an actor coming from this city. This stone so gives us a more precise idea of the repertoire master, mainly, as you can see, Euripides and two tragic poets of the 4th century, Archestratos and Chiron. So I won't discuss in detail the choice of the pieces. A few days ago, I tried to show that it's related to the cultural policy of the Pergamon kingdom, because Heracles is the ancestor of Telephos, who is the supposed ancestor of the Pergamon dynasty. But that's a huge another topic. I will just focus on the fact that you see that Euripides is very important, and we find again the Orestes, which the pirates. So that leads me to my second part, the place of song in Hellenistic competitions. The competitions are a good barometer of the musical choices corresponding to the period. Those of Delphi having quickly established themselves as a reference in the Pythia were to musicians when the Olympia were to athletes and chariot owners. That was the best. So if something is made in Delphi, it should be made everywhere else regarding music. The proliferation in Hellenistic time of Iso-Pythian competition in the Hellenistic period attests to this. These competitions have the same prestige as the Pythian competitions, and they included all or part of the events given at Delphi. You have here the list of all the competitions which were elevated to this level of Iso-Pythian from starting with the Ptolemaic in Alexandria to the Hecatesian in Thessalonica, including, of course, the Soterian in Delphi in the mid-3rd century BC. So it means that if that you cannot find the Iso-Pythian contents in disciplines that are not performed in Delphi, in the Pythian competitions. So let's have a look more precisely, and there are 4 also other important competitions for the musicians. In Hellenistic times, the Naian Dodona, the Halian Modes, the Heraian Argos, later the sheep of Argos, and the Actian Nicocos. But let's have a look at the evolution of the competitions in the Pythia of Delphi. Since their organization in 586 and 582, according to Pausanias, the Pythian competitions have included 3 musical events: the solo of Pythagoria, the solo of Auretike, and the solo of Kithara since 558. The practice of singing accompanied by the aulos, the aulodia, was introduced in 586 but abandoned in 582 because it was judged too related to funeral. The music felt like the music of a funeral, so the Amphitryon decided to abandon the aulodia. In the middle, and nothing changed till the 4th century. In 339-32, the famous Peon of Lodamos, which has been engraved in stone in Delphi, and is still preserved. In this quite paradoxical period, because it's there to Dionysus, but anyhow, it asks for the introduction of dramatic festivals in Delphi. That's here what it says. In the Pentateuch Ephiads, the god gave the organizer the order to establish in honor of Pacos a sacrifice and a choral competition of many pieces, Evoe, Pacos, Oye, Aya. So it means that in the years after, the dramatic competition, first difference, but also tragedy and comedy, were included into the program of the Pythia. And Plutarch says that the introduction of the tragedy in Delphi was the beginning of the introduction of many other competitions. Point, it was not a good thing because he thought that everything related to poetry, just mere poetry, and not its place in Delphi. But anyhow, if we look at the next steps, we cannot be sure, but my hypothesis is that the Rhapsody was introduced in Delphi. So, of course, it was a competition in Athens, very well attested in Athens in the Great Panathenea. But in Delphi, we have no evidence for Rhapsody before the 3rd century in the Amphitryon area. So, whatever this is. So, my hypothesis is that it was introduced in 290, when for the only time in the history of the Pythian competitions, it was organized in Athens by Demetrius. And then we know that between 245 and 225, in comparison to the Soteria, the Olodia made its great return to Delphi. So it's again performed, as well as epic poetry, which has to be distinguished with Rhapsody. Rhapsody is Homeric singing. Epic poetry is new compositions. So we see that singing actually became more and more important in Delphi, as in the archaic classical areas. But actually, as I told you, there is another competition in Delphi, which are the Soteria. And in the first half of the 3rd century BC, when they were found, 2006, after the Gaul attack of 2079 BC, so there was first a festival which was not in imitation to the Pythian competition, but was still a competition organized by the Technitiles, so the corporation of artists of Isthmus and Nemea. And that's very interesting, this lists of the Amphitryon Soteria, because we have all the participants, and so we can see how many singers there were in each chorus for each performance. I give you one of the best preserved to explain how it works. So you have, of course, at the beginning of the inscription, the official, the mention of all the officials, taking part in the competition, and then all the musicians. So first, rhapsode, the competition of the rhapsodes, then the singers to the kitharoida, and then we have the aulos players who probably took part in the competition of aulos, but also were playing for the dithyramb. Because afterwards, after the aulos players, we have the chorus of youngs and the chorus of adults. So these are the choruses of dithyrambs, dithyramb for boys and dithyramb for adults. So if we look at this list, so the numbers, we see that for the adults we have, if we look at all the lists, we have between 11 and 15 men, and between 12 and 15 boys. So, of course, it's not the numbers we have for classical times. If you think of the dithyramb with 50 people, but that's so we have less singers, but that's not 2 or 3 singers. That's a dozen of singers. But the most interesting is if we look at the tragedy and the comedy, because after the choruses of dithyrambs, we have also the members of the choruses of the tragedy and the comedy. So you have first, on the left, the singers of the tragedy, their aulos player, and their chorus instructor. You see, you have 3 times the same, because there were 3 in competition, 3 groups, 3 troops, theatrical troops in competition. So each one has 3 singers for the actors, and an aulos player, and the instructor of the chorus. The only thing, we don't have any information about the tragic chorus. So we think, people who are dealing with these inscriptions, think that the chorus of the dithyramb was used for the tragedy, or the chorus of the comedy, because if you look at the right, you have first the actors of the comedy with, so here, the actors here, the actors of the comedy, then the aulos player, the instructor, and then 3 actors for comedy, aulos player, and instructor, and then the chorus of comedy. So maybe the chorus of dithyramb or the chorus of comedy was used in the tragedy. But anyhow, you see that in the Soteria Delphi, the staging tragedy or comedy meant to have 3 actors on stage and a chorus made of something like 10 or 12 actors. So it's not nothing. That's not just some excerpts from tragedy. That's really a staging of a piece in which singing has still its place. Let's have a look, another look, I would say, about singing and instrumental music. I mean, in terms of mondi. Sorry to speak about mondi, but we are fortunate to have some inscriptions that deal with that and give the prize in the mondi, which was given in certain competitions to the winners. In Helsinki, we don't have so much. We have one in the 4th century for the Panathenaea in Athens, one in the 4th century. I put this you have on the screen of the Artemisia in Eretria, and I will show you afterwards an inscription from the Saratria in Tanagra. And but it's interesting to see how the different disciplines are judged. You see that kitharoida is always at the top, but still since the archaic period, it's the best competition ever. So singing with instruments. So singing is still important. Then, so this is the order here in the inscription. So you have then your third, that's 120 drachmae, but it's still the second price, actually. Then Kitharis, that's 110 drachmae, so it's a solo instrumental. And you see that in the Artemision Eritrea, you have a competition of boys, Auloidoi, who won 50 drachmae, but no competition of others. And a competition we rarely find, which is the singers of Power. So you see, for example, that in Eritrea in the 4th century, there are most of the competitions are with singing, and that there is absolutely the instrumental are not rewarded better than singing performances. Let's have a look at the, sorry, it's very tiny, at the end of the Hellenistic period, but actually you have no other inscription with such information. The Sarapian in Tanagra in 86 BC. You have again all the lists of the competition. So you see that here you have much more disciplines that go from trumpet, herald, then the rhapsodist, then poets, probably poets of praise, aulos player, singer to aulos, kithara player, singer to kithara. That's the order of the inscription, which is, as you can see, not hierarchical. Poet of satire drama, tragic poet, actor, comic poet, actor of tragedy, comic poet, actor of comedy, ancient tragedy, old comedy, poet of epinesis, audiences of tragedy, and the instructors, and finally, the actors. So you have all the crowns which were given and the value of each crown, and you can see that the Kytharodia is still the best. That's a crown of 5.5 chorus letters and 1.5 oboes. But if we have a look at everything and go quickly to the conclusion, that actually it doesn't show that instruments were better tried than singing. So the competition with singing are still the most, the ones who deserve the most valuable crowns. So in short, although the documentation is extremely complete and the conclusion cannot be generalized, these examples gathered here on the status of singers in competition do not allow us to conclude that singing has been discredited in relation to the instrument, even if the place it occupies is not in the same proportions as in the classical period. There are less singers in the chorus, but there are still singers. And the competition with singers are got better rewards than singing competition, than instrument competition. So, I would say that Hellenistic times are still a song culture with new modalities, depending on new political and social changes. That will be the end of my presentation today. The history of ancient musical practices is inseparable from the socio-political context in which they took place. Artists did not live in a closed environment, and they had to adapt to the main changes in their environment. While in the classical period, artists were mainly attached to their city of origin, in the name of which they performed in particular competitions, in the Hellenistic period, they formed large regional corporations of artists, the so-called Dionysiac Technita. In Attica, Isthmus and Nemea, Ionia and Hellespont, Egypt, Cyprus, for the main ones. These Technita include both adults and children in their ranks, as you can see from the inscriptions related to them. And thus, these corporations constituted training centers that guaranteed an artistic career. In this context, we can risk speaking of professionalization of musicians to the extent that this association plays under the patronage of Dionysus, allowed the members to live from their art, hence the existence of quite strong tensions between them, especially regarding who can organize which competition. Delphi, it led to a war, really war, between the Technitarian of Isthmus and Lemia and the Technitarian of Athens. They burned a house, actually. For the subjects here, we can see that they recruited both instrumentalists and singers, who therefore enjoyed the same status. They were members of this corporation, but no breaks between them. We are particularly familiar with one of the main events organized by the Athenian Corporation, that is the famous Delphic hymn with musical notation, engraved on the Athenian treasury in Delphi. Here, this is the Athenian treasury, and on the south wall here. So this wall was a place where the hymns were engraved. You have seen them now in the museum. So the two hymns composed first by Athenaeus, son of Athenius of Athens, and the second by Limenius, son of Turnus of Athens. So both were performed in the year 128-127 in the procession that the Athenians made in Delphi as a demonstration of force, I would say, against the Technitarian of Isthmus and Lemia. It was to show that Athenian had a long history of alliance with Delphi. So the hymns are talking about this alliance between Athens and Delphi. But let's have a look at the performance itself, for the beauty of the stone. This is the hymns and the first hymn and the musical notation. But my point is the composition of the delegation we know by another inscription. So this delegation had, of course, the head of the delegation, so-called the architeuros, then 4 officials, the 4 theoroi, 1 coro didaskalos, 1 instructor for the chorister, and 39 singers for the pair. And in the following of the inscription, we see that there are also 2 aulos players, 7 kithara players, 1 aulodos, 2 kitharoidoi, 10 artists of theater, tragedy, comedy, even the person who is in charge of the himatia, of the troupe, and 2 other coro didaskalos. So, in regard to the other choruses we have seen in the competition, 39 is a big chorus, and it's close to the classical, I would say, way of doing it in Athens, in the Lithuania. So it was a big event that the Athenians wanted to make really impressive for all the people who were in this period. And I tried to reconstruct actually how and where exactly it was performed. So here is a reconstruction of the century, but later. Just forget. Not later. The century. This is one. So, because some people have said that the hymns were performed in theater, but no, the paean was performed in the end of the procession, arriving in Delphi. But the paean is not normally you stand when you sing the paean. You are not moving. When you move, it's a processional tune. So the prosodion. We have the prosodion at the end of the second hymn of Hymenaeus. So, in my opinion, the paean was performed here, which was the main interest of the century from the 4th century onwards. And this is a building which has a stoa, a portico, which has been built in the 4th century BC, and at this time, so since the 3rd century, the weapons of the Gauls, the Galatai, were exhibited there. And the two hymns talk about this event in Delphi and how the gods, Apollo and Zeus, prevented the sanctuary from being sacked by the Gauls. So it makes sense that the Technitai celebrated this event with the weapons of the Gauls just in the area. So they performed the two pairs here, and then they go to the altar, which is here. In the south or in the north, I'm not sure, maybe rather in the north actually, because this was it was not so free as it seems here. This place there were many statues of devotees of Christ and so on. But anyhow, if you look at the prosodion of Hyménios, you see that the prosodion mentions first the Apolline triad, Apollo, Leto, and Artemis, who were depicted in the Western pediment, according to Pausanias, and then it mentions Bacchus, who was depicted in the Eastern pediment, and finally, the prosodion wants the victory of the Romans, because the Athenians asked the Romans to make the difference between them and their rivals of Isthmus and Nemea. And close to the altar, which is here, you have the pillar indicated by the Roman general Paulus Emilianus. So, if we have a topographical lecture reading of the hymns, they see first Apollo, then Bacchus, and then the Romans, while performing the prosodion, while singing the prosodion. And actually, the paean is something which is very, whose importance increased in Hellenistic times. If you think to this very famous passage of Aristophanes we dealt with last year, I think, on the increasing paeans in South Italy because of epidemics. Because of epidemics, people writing paeans increase, there were plenty of paeans, but actually what happens in the Hellenistic times is that we have lots of paeans written in this period. For example, in Delphi, Cleocares of Athens composed a paean for the Theoxenia in Delphi, and actually the paean is probably the genre which is really associated to Delphi, because first Pindar wrote paeans to Delphi, and we see that in most of the cases related to the Theoxenia in Delphi, there is a paean, the paean of Aristomenes of Corinth, which has been engraved in Delphi. The paean to Dionysus of Philodamos was performed in the Theoxenia. We have here the example also of Cleocares. We know lots of paeans which have been written in the 4th century. The paean, for example, of Erythrea, to Asclepius. We can add also the paean of Isilos and Epidaurus in the early 3rd century. So many paeans have been composed in Hellenistic times, which means that there was sun. So many choruses sang the paean in the Hellenistic period. And the paean was particularly performed in Delphi, in the Theoxenia, which included a banquet. I will finish my talk today about the question of music in banquets in the frame of these associations. Because we have a couple of steles, as you can see here, with the inscription, but also with depiction of banquets, including musicians from the 2nd century BC from the north part of Turkey. And all of this can be related not to the technitai of Dionysus, but to religious associations in the same type of the Dionysiac technitai. And so the first of them is this stele found in Palermo, so the area of Cyzicus in Nicaea, which is now preserved in the British Museum. So the inscription reads, "To Zeus, Hephaestus, and their association, Toko, I, Talos, Eponymous Madrid said, have offered this relief." And if you have a look at what is depicted, you see, of course, in the niche, three deities, from left to right, Zeus brandishing his thunderbolt, Dionysus, and Apollo holding the kithara in the left hand and the fial in the right hand. Motif inspired by the Apollo Patros of Leocaros, with the addition of the omphalos in the snake. But the more important thing is that what we have here. So we have here a banquet made of these people of the association, and here an aulos player with the Phrygian aulos, so the incurved aulos. Also the krupeza of the flute. So this krupeza is made of two symbols with symbols with claps against one another. A dancing female, and then the cook with oboloi, so to prepare the meat, and here the wine bearer. And this kind of depiction can be compared to, sorry, I haven't detailed, but that's much better. So again, sorry, here the aulos player with the Phrygian aulos here, and these monuments come to a region close to Phrygia, so it's quite normal. Here the krupeza, and then the cook, the wine, and the dancing. And we can compare this to this one, which is from the same area, same period, late 2nd century BC. You have here, so the goddess Cybele with the tympanon, the god Apollo with the kithara and the fial, and a scene of sacrifice. But the inscription gives more details about that. The members of the Tiasos, both men and women, awarded Stratonike, daughter of Menecrates, was priestess of the mother goddess Cybele and Apollo, in the 170th year, a crown with a headband, which was engraved on a steel and proclaimed, as well as another crown, which was a handband, which was proclaimed in the assembly place dedicated to Zeus, because she had birth voluntarily. And so the inscription is here, so related to this scene, but here you find again these banqueters here, and the musician here. Actually, that we can wonder whether it's here a plagiaulos, actually, and not an aulos. But here is an aulos, for sure. So here, and then dancer, and then the platter with wine here. So the preparation of the wine. And we have two other scenes. Sorry for the quality, but actually I haven't seen the stories. I just saw it in a publication related to all this series. And you see here in the MOISA Museum, so you have again the same kind of depiction with the banqueters here, the gods sacrifice, and here. So the aulos player, the dancer, and the cooking, and still here, so the musician. So these religious associations were involved in singing practices, but also, as you can see, that was my point, to another practice which is also in development in Hellenistic times, that is dancing. As you can see, so on all of these reliefs, there were spectacles including music and dance, like Xenophon's banquet in the 4th century, but here in the frame of these associations. Conclusion? To conclude, so the epigraphic investigation clearly showed that singing was still an integral part of Greek culture in the Hellenistic period, but in different proportions, in different ways. Within the performance, the instrument tended to prevail over the voice, whether through the taste for instrumental solos or the reduction in the size of choruses in certain competition events. But you cannot conclude from this that instrumental music was valued over choral music. Or, if we had a quantitative approach, in fact, there has never been as much singing as in the Hellenistic period. Competitions that had no dramatic events now welcome them. Throughout the Greek world, actors give voice, and the multiplication of competitions, notably Aesopist ones, contributes to a diffusion of choral practices in Asia Minor, for example, at least those linked to stage competition, particularly ancient tragedy competition. Alongside different tragedy and comedy, many paeans and processional songs were also performed. But the community dimension, the civic dimension, was not absent. It was expressed in other circumstances, especially when it came to a demonstration of force, such as that made by the Technitides of Athens and Delphi, to eliminate the direct revolt, the Technitides of Isthmus and Nemea. Song was therefore even a political and diplomatic weapon, tool, and in this context, the new music became a powerful tool, if not of propaganda, at least for understanding between cities as proof of belonging to a culture, to a common pioneer. It remains nonetheless that the Hellenistic period is so characterized by the emergence of an art which considerably reduced the part of singing, the mime, or even completely eliminated pantomime, which would enjoy enormous success, as you know, but in the imperial era. Thanks for.
It was really rich and very, very stimulating paper. And even this last part with the reconstruction in the I found very, very interesting. And yes, maybe there is someone who wants to ask any questions.
You can ask questions in French, in Italian,
in German,
in German.
Even several languages, so don't be shy.
Can I ask something?
Of course.
I ask something. It is a trivial question, but maybe I say this presence, this allora, always intrigued me, this presence, contemporary presence of Dionysus and Apollo in the same place, of course. This is a point very interesting. But I mean, in the songs, in this song, the piano, there is some hint to Dionysus. Or there is.
That's a piano to the
There is a piano to Dionysus, not to Apollo, because normally
to
Dionysus. So yes, because usually the piano is to Apollo. Yes, and so in this, but it is in this specific case because we are in Delphi that there are some part eating to it.
Sure. The point is that in Delphi, because that's one of the parts, the century was divided into 2 parts a year, 9 months for Apollo and 3 months for Dionysus. So they could rely on that to write this piano to the day. The context, there are many hypotheses on this and my idea is that it's Athenian Commission actually, because they wanted to have more importance in the fiction between actually the third and the fourth sacred wars, and that's why the Pean asked for the introduction of dramatic festival, because where do we have dramatic festival but in Athens? Mm-hmm. So also the link between Apollo and Dionysus, it does exist in Athens through the cult of Apollo Patros and the cult of Dionysus in the theatre and in the Great Dionysia. That's the two main festivals in Athens. You have the Dionysia, and then you have the Targalia, which are related to Apollo Patros. And the link is made with Delphi in such a way. And I have lots of other elements in Delphi showing that the Athenians in the 4th century tried to occupy, but with a cultural policy, Delphi. And actually, the new temple, which has been built in the 4th century, the sculptures of the Pentagon were made by Athenian sculptures. So there are lots of hints going to the idea that the Athenians organized everything, and they had probably the idea to introduce their own competitions of theater in Delphi. So they could play on this Dionysiac Apolline link to succeed in this cultural policy.
So that means that in some way this idea of this strong opposition between these two sides, it is
that's Nietzsche.
That's Nietzsche. So this is even the reception. It is a common place. It is the Vulgata that it is completely anachronistic in comparison with antiquity. And even in iconography, you see that in 1st century, at the end of 1st century, you have this iconographies where Dionysus is together with Apollo. Everything is mixed.
Yeah.
It is magic.
Here, so okay, we are late 2nd century BC, but you have Sibyl, who is rather on the side, if I may say, of Dionysus. But here you have explicitly a priestess of Apollo and Sibyl.
So this is very important, I think, to state this, because we have this Vulgata, this reception, romantic and anachronistic, but it is still very, very strong. But we have to be aware that it was not like this.
And another reason why this pair is dedicated to Dionysus, in my opinion, that's in my forthcoming book. Yes. I hope in a couple of months it will be out. In that, if you look at the Paean of Philodemus, you understand that the singers are asking the god Dionysus for regeneration of the vegetation, of the prosperity of the country. And at this time, we are just after the 3rd Sacred War, which was a disaster for Delphi. The Phocidians sacked Delphi, so all the cultures were destroyed. And the Paean is the song for salvation. So if you combine the idea of salvation and the one of regeneration, you have the Apollon and the Dionysus aspects.
It's very interesting, the discussion of Daniela, because I see in your sources one source about Aristophanes of Tarente, and the Paean is only for women, and I see only affecting the women was unusual, and the question is here a Paean for Dionysus or for Apollo? Because in Tarente there are for women Arabic, and this is Tarantismo.
Yeah.
And it's only for women.
But
And
yeah,
they
but
have
as you
such
can see,
ecstasies that sometimes ecstasies is the typical symptom of women with Tarantismo.
yes.
Very interesting.
So actually, yes, that's a disease which concerns the women. But if you read, you see that the inhabitants of Lockery and Wagon have consulted the oracle, which is probably the oracle of Apollo. So that's the answer to Apollo, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting place of Aristophanes or Taranto. Thank you.
And in that testimony, it's likely that it was the men who were supposed to sing this piano to cure their women, or the women themselves who are to sing these pianos.
As we have no evidence on women singing piano,
Yes,
rather say men.
indeed.
Or the only evidence we have is in Aristophanes. So
Yeah,
was something.
So the most likely scenario is that men were singing in order to cure the women, because in the ancient world, women were not thought capable to cure themselves. They were so masculinist vision of the of society. They needed someone to sing for them. Thank you for this. This illuminating paper, and I think you did justice of this very common idea that with the advent of Hellenistic period, the so-called song culture of the Greeks comes to an end, which of course, after what you said, is not true at all, and it's very significant, I think, what you said, that actually in this period, it seems to that we have more testimony of singing than any other period in Greek. So there's a lot of singing, and I was thinking that there might be a relation between this fact that you brought up and the fact that in some Hellenistic sources, I'm thinking of the pseudo-Aristotelian Problems, book 19, there are so many references to how voice works in singing, I mean, in connection with different instruments. And the compilator of that book often asks, why is voice more pleasant in singing with a lyre, or with an aulos, or with many lyres, or with many alloy, and so on. And he goes on explaining the reasons why it might be more or less pleasant. I think that this can be accounted for if we think that people in that time had so many occasions to listen to different kind of performances. So it was natural to them to ask themselves why that particular kind of performance was more pleasant than another. So I guess there's a link between this enrichment of musical offerings, what you could see in the streets at musical games, musical contests, and so on, and the theoretical reflection on this. So I guess your paper is very important to complete this kind of, a broader picture of what was happening after the late classical period, and especially between the 3rd and the 2nd century BC. So, yeah, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you too, because that's a good point actually. Yes, I haven't thought about it, but yes, it can relate to the discussions on the balance between voice and instruments in the problem at that, for example. Yes.
Yeah, sure. For example, when you said that at some point they abolished aulodia in Delphi, and they restored it a few centuries later, if I take it correctly, there is a problem in which it is claimed that voice works better with aulos than with lyre. And we don't know when exactly those problems were written. There, as you know very well, there is a range, a chronological range between the death of Aristotle and Karl Stumpf, the 1st century after Christ. But somewhere in between there is the restoration of aulodia there. And the author has very good reasons to claim that for a singer it is better to sing with the accompaniment of an aulos than of a lyre, for very technical reasons. I wonder if there is a link between these two things. But maybe I'm looking ahead of myself, I don't know. But this is very interesting, so thank you.
Maybe we can stop here, or we can add some. I don't know.
Check online if you check.
Oh, yes.
Maybe. Yes, I don't know.
If there are, you have someone, you have
No.
and
Prova a chiudere questo. No? Eccola, eccola.
No.
Allora no.
No. Fa. Yes.
Ah, ok.
Sono. No, maybe not.
No, è scappata.
No,